Mercedes have had one of their most challenging seasons in the last decade. Their fall from the top was so abrupt, with the team going in the wrong direction with the new aerodynamic regulations. So what can Mercedes learn from this year? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. You can't be too big to fail in Formula 1. Mercedes has been the dominant team through the turbo hybrid era. Since that engine regulation change in 2014, the Mercedes team have won every single Constructors' Championship and 7 of the 8 Drivers' Championships. So with that kind of form, it was reasonable to expect them to continue this form into 2022. But that wasn't the case. The biggest aerodynamic regulation change in 40 years switched the focus of these cars to the ground effect, creating Venturi tunnels underneath the car to produce the downforce. Mercedes made a mistake in their design, and subsequently their car has suffered more from the porpoising phenomenon that impacted the cars particularly badly in the early stages of the season. This limited the height that they could run the car, with the team having to increase the ride height in order to protect the car and, more importantly, the drivers. This season brought an abrupt end to the team's dominance in the sport, and for me this shows that even the very best in the sport can and will make mistakes from time to time. This season was a challenge throughout for Mercedes. The beginning of the year saw them competing with midfield teams and even some backmarkers as the pecking order was becoming clear. It certainly felt like Mercedes were closer to the chasing pack behind them rather than the top 2 teams ahead of them. However, the team found a better way to set up the car and brought upgrades which allowed them to reduce the porpoising and increase the speed the drivers could handle. At one point this year, their car was reportedly limited by the amount of porpoising G-force the drivers could cope with as opposed to the optimum car setup. By the end of the year, the Mercedes car was far stronger, and they had traced the issue back to a key decision, and they even became the second fastest team at some circuits towards the end of the season as they leapfrogged Ferrari. The team still ended up third in the championship standings, which is a long way down from the championship winning form that they'd become used to. But with the momentum that they've got, they could well come back next year. Overall though, I think it's got to be a red box for Mercedes and their fall from the top. If Red Bull have proved anything this year, is that it was possible to produce a faster car when competing 2 years in a row, even if there's a cost cap question mark in there as well. This driver pairing will need more management than the last one. This year was the first for Mercedes with George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. This move to replace Valtteri Bottas was a decision that was made to secure Russell's future, as I think if they'd held off much longer, he could have and would have looked elsewhere. But it has resulted in a switch from a clear number 1 in Hamilton and clear number 2 in Bottas to 2 drivers with realistic chances of being the top driver at Mercedes. George Russell's performances this year have confirmed this, as he was one of the most consistent drivers. He was often in the top 5 positions and achieved the team's only pole and only win of the season. As a result, Russell beat Hamilton in the drivers' standings, which increases the complexity for the Mercedes team. Both of these drivers will want priority, and I think a radio call in Brazil by Russell was very telling. He asked the team if the pair would be asked to hold position on the safety car restart towards the end, as he hoped to be able to cruise to victory without pressure from his teammate. But the team's response was clear: the pair would be given permission to race. This is a tricky environment, and it throws the mind back to when Mercedes had a Hamilton-Rosberg partnership and the pair clashed. Back then, the team was very dominant, so they didn't have the same external pressure that they might face if the team is more competitive with another team in 2023. Following the conclusion of the tricky teammate relationship between Rosberg and Hamilton, the team boss, Toto Wolff, commented that he didn't want 2 lead drivers in the team again. With this new pairing, Mercedes was forced into a bit of a corner and had to take Russell over Bottas for this year. So the question becomes whether the pair will manage themselves better or if they'll need direct management from the team. I wonder if Mercedes will be able to control either driver in this context. Assuming they're more competitive next year, the team might want to support Hamilton to his 8th World Championship as their main goal, or they may want to give the drivers a chance to see who comes out on top early on before using team orders to manage the pair later in the year. Of course, these scenarios are entirely hypothetical, and subject to Mercedes producing a car that's more competitive than the one that they had this year, but I don't think that's out of the realms of possibility based on their trajectory of development. Either way, I think it's clear that these 2 drivers are going to be occupying the same piece of track on a regular basis in 2023, and the team are going to have to manage that pairing. It worked well this year, but there's no doubt that it could go very wrong very quickly. So the team's driver pairing gets a green box for now, whilst also being very aware that this could become an amber or a red box very quickly in the future. They can solve problems quickly. The Mercedes team's response to their fall from the top was to go back to the drawing board and try and fix it. One of the big challenges of that though was the cost cap. Things such as their skinny side pod design would have to stay, as they wouldn't be able to afford to change those elements along with all the other cooling challenges that would bring. Plus, the skinny side pod design might actually be a benefit that will become clear when Mercedes reveal their 2023 Challenger. What I found very impressive was the fact that the team traced the decision tree to diagnose where they went off course. Wolff has even said that they made the mistake in October 2021, when they decided that they would be able to run the car as low as possible without issue. This was an error, and with the team forced to increase the ride height, they lost out, meaning many other elements of the W13 weren't working as planned. But under Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team has developed a culture which allows everyone working for the team to be the best that they can be. Simple things like ensuring every employee has access to a parking space, flying pillows around the world to ensure the pit crew can get some good rest, and developing a no-blame culture to empower their workforce. I can imagine this culture has been tested more in the last year than it has been for the last decade. But it's this culture and attitude of the team that allowed them to quickly identify the issue and test solutions. For the first half of the season, they had the lowest amount of CFD and wind tunnel testing time of any team, but they will have maximised each and every wind tunnel run to identify the best route to go down in terms of development. In the end, this happened quickly, and the development of the Mercedes car is probably only rivaled by the Aston Martin this year when looking at it relative to other teams. This is a promising sign for Mercedes. They've identified what went wrong and will have implemented steps to avoid this problem again in the future. Plus, they designed and built parts to improve the W13 to the extent that they got that all-important race win this season. Personally, I think it's clear that the Mercedes setup is one of the best in Formula 1, and this one poor season hasn't meant that that's gone away. So it's a green box for the way the team responded to the issues of 2022. Bulletproof reliability is key. One massive positive for Mercedes this year was the fact that they had just a single reliability-related retirement across the whole season. This issue came at the last Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi, with Hamilton retiring due to a hydraulics failure. This season reliability was a concern for the teams. Whilst many mechanical elements would remain the same as previous seasons, the aerodynamic change forced some of the teams to rethink their packaging and how their cars were designed within. The Mercedes approach to this was clearer than many other teams, as they had the size 0 side pod approach. Whilst many teams struggled with basic reliabilities throughout the year, the Mercedes was bulletproof. Alpine, for example, suffered many reliability-related problems in 2022, with the majority of those coming for Alonso. And then Ferrari had to turn their power units down to a lower setting in Mexico just to ensure it could survive the high-altitude circuit. So with many challenges of 2022 for Mercedes, the reliability was not one, and I think the team can be pleased with that result going into the new set of regulations. So it's clearly a green box for Mercedes reliability this year. The Mercedes power unit advantage is gone. This year also saw an engine freeze. The turbo hybrid power units have been in action since 2014, and for the majority of the time since that point, they were the team to beat in that department. Since that time, Mercedes were challenged by Ferrari in 2019, although that was clearly a dubious challenge given the directive from the FIA regarding fuel flows set them back. And then in 2021, the Honda power unit in the Red Bull would offer a much closer challenge than it had done previously, and at times it looked on par with the Mercedes. This season confirmed that the advantage gap had been closed, with the Mercedes power unit being closely matched with their rivals this year. Admittedly, this is very difficult to measure without more data, due to different downforce setups and the amount of drag the cars have been producing. But on the face of it, this year, the engines seem to be on a par with each other. This is a great sign for Formula 1 fans, as it means it's far more likely that we will have competitive racing through to the new power unit regulations that come into force in 2026. Hopefully the cars will converge during this time and we may have more competitive seasons between now and then. For me though, I think this was foreseeable, but Mercedes can no longer rely on a power unit advantage in the races. And as such, I think the team's engine deserves an amber box for the 2022 season. Honourable mentions. There's one honourable mention for this Mercedes-focused video, and that's all about the relationships off track. The team's feud with Red Bull was certainly the focus of many debates and controversy, with Toto Wolff being vocal regarding the cost cap breach and flexi floors. It seems like there was a lot of friction post-2021, and that could be interesting going into the future. So there we have the 5 things Mercedes learned from 2022. Let me know who else you'd like me to cover in one of these style videos, and make sure to subscribe to not miss out.